Our names are Sarah Brandel and Lane Lennon, and we are interviewing you for the IUP COVID-19 Oral History Project. We are interested in learning about people's experiences during the pandemic. Today's date is February 21st, 2023. Would you please begin by introducing yourself and spelling your name?
Sure. Lara Luetkehans, Luetkehans.
Right. So for the purpose of the interview, would you be willing to share your full name, age, and where you were living?
Sure. So again, my name is Lara Luetkehans. I'm 55, and I was living in Indiana, Pennsylvania.
Alrighty. So to begin, how did your personal and or professional life, priorities and projects that you were working on change once the pandemic hit?
Yeah, it was quite stark. So it was just before spring break in March of 2020. My current position at the time at IUP was Dean of Education and Communications. So our provost, Timothy Moreland at the time, pulled together the deans and other leaders across campus to an urgent meeting to kind of just figure out what the heck was going on in the world, how we needed to respond as an institution, and to make what we thought were really significant decisions about spring break and whether we extend spring break or how do we manage the immediate situation. And I don't think anybody had in their mind at that time the length of time that was in front of us and the critical decisions that were in front of us. So that's sort of my memory of the kickoff to the pandemic. And then, of course, on a personal level, concerns were my children who were in college, two of whom were in college, one in California, one in Pittsburgh, and then a daughter I had at home who is 11 and what her schooling would look like going forward. But I think in all the pandemic, now I can look back at it with a balanced view, but obviously there were just so many unknowns at the time. That's really the feeling that I remember most, is not knowing what to anticipate and how to approach it.
So before the pandemic hit, what did your day-to-day look like with work and how life was at home? What was your average day? What did that look like before the pandemic?
Yeah, so I was becoming close to an empty nester. Like I said, I had two kids away at school. My daughter was still home. I was working outside the office every day and never worked from home, always worked from my office. My husband's position is in Pittsburgh, and he worked daily from Pittsburgh. Didn't work from home. And so probably most of our awake hours were spent in our jobs or outside the home. So it was quite different, as you can imagine, following that March time period.
Just following the list of questions, you received a list of questions prior to this interview. Is there any specific place that you would like to start?
No, I think we could just proceed with the questions.
Kind of went over how life was before the pandemic. What would you like to let us know first and foremost about your experience during the pandemic itself?
I think the other piece that I would characterize was kind of living in the moment. And at least in the cycles of academic life and my work life, and even my home life, because it's so predicated on academic cycles between my job and my kids who are in school, you kind of think of things in an academic year and suddenly started to think about things in a semester or less. In the beginning, it was really day to day. And then, of course, as we started to understand what things might be and we started to refer to things as the new normal, it became something that was a little bit more expected, something that we could plan a little bit further out, but it was still sort of that living in the moment. And I think it really drove everything that was happening at IUP. And so thinking about how we teach and learn, how we interact with students, how we engage with students at a distance, their safety, the safety of our employees. Safety became obviously a paramount element that really hadn't existed before. And I think thinking through those lenses was really different. But we certainly learned quite a bit in terms of how to do things then, how to respond to crises, and how to maybe think about things in new ways going forward. And I think we're still learning. And so I guess as the other piece that I would reflect on is it's still pervasive. So obviously we're not living day to day with the decision making like we were back while the pandemic was really active, but we are still reflecting on what does it mean. We know the experiences of our students and our faculty change them forever, and so how do we respond to that as they grow and develop? So we're continuing to learn from that.
Okay, so you said that there was from the pandemic, you mentioned in the last question how it also affected not only how you were responding during the pandemic itself, but new ways moving forward. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Sure. So I think we're all accustomed to new tools and technologies for sure. I think we use them in new ways and in more regularized ways. I think there's an expectation about access to people and convenience and being able to connect with people via technology in a different way. And so I think we were already sort of escalating toward that on-demand life, but I think the pandemic really accelerated that. And so, a small thing just in my daily schedule is I am scheduled now back to back because there's the assumption that they are Zoom meetings. And so there's no travel time even across campus. And so really the efficiency, I'm more available, but also, I rarely have time to breathe. And so if we do have a schedule meeting that requires face-to-face, oftentimes there won't be room in the schedule. So I either have to leave a meeting early, arrive at a meeting late because we're just still getting accustomed to how do we integrate technology into that. But I also think that those new ways of working are certainly having implications for the classroom. So I think students are coming in with different kinds of expectations. They've seen what learning online looks like. They see what being able to access those learning experiences and how that's different. And so we're trying to keep pace with that. I think one of the most incredible outcomes of the pandemic for IUP was our pivot to online and how we were able to skill up faculty very quickly into moving courses online and trying to continue to make our curriculum and our courses accessible, but really investing in building in the skills of faculty. And so I think that, again, it continues to grow and develop.
So during the pandemic, obviously there was a lot of tangible things that, objects that were very connected to the pandemic, like masks and things like that. Is there any specific experience or you had with a specific object that you would like to talk about? This could include articles of clothing, documents, your favorite mask, because lots of people had different styled masks to wear, objects, photographs, or any other type of objects related to the pandemic?
I was definitely a fan of disposable masks. So I didn't really get attached to a mask. And at home, there are definitely outfits. They still hang in my closet, but that just remind me of the pandemic, and I can't really wear them anymore because I spent so much time in them at home. And so that sort of stands out to me. Other than that, I mean, even our homes became rearranged during that time. So now it's back to the intended, I guess, living spaces. But at the time, we didn't have enough offices for everybody that was trying to work at home. So every room was set up. So again, when I look at certain furniture in my home, I think of the pandemic or think about the stacks of papers that built up over 18 months of working remotely. And so I'm not sure there's something that I could sort of give or contribute to a set of artifacts. It's all very personal, but certainly objects played a big role of the pandemic experience.
All right, moving forward, in what ways did the pandemic affect your work during like the main part of it, and also even like after the after the pandemic, as we're in like kind of like the post-pandemic days?
Yeah. So I think you know, an important part of the trying to work and live life all from the same space and being, you know, confined to home, everything really bled together. And so there wasn't a compartmentalization of work and life. And like I said, with multiple people trying, so of course my kids came home from school, they were trying to find places to work. You know, I really enjoyed, of course, having my college students home so that we could engage. And, you know, throughout the day, you would start your day, be working, you know, take a little break, go get a glass of water, talk to your family who's also engaged in work and at home. And, you know, so I think it brought about a closeness and a difference during the pandemic that I certainly miss in the post-pandemic life, although I would not enjoy going back to work from home. So I know a lot of people do. Now my husband does work from home 4 days a week, and he goes into the office just 1 day a week. So he's really thought about how his job has changed significantly. I've had a change in job at IUP, but even so, I can't imagine going back to working remotely fully. There's too much connectedness here and too much support in terms of being able to support a work life here. But there were certainly you know, really enjoyable times during the pandemic where when all of that was integrated, there was that sort of really tight connection with a very small group of people.
So during the pandemic, did it like change like how you went about like with your priorities, your projects, or like the work that you were doing during the peak of the pandemic? Did like the close camaraderie with like your family, did that change how you went about your work, or even like your work schedule itself?
Yeah, like I said, I think it bled a little bit more. I don't know if that piece had an impact so much on the work, the priorities, but as I started out saying earlier in our conversation, the pandemic became pervasive. And so there were extra meetings, extra check-ins, trying to figure out how teams could work remotely and interact and maintain communication and ongoing support without being together. I think in terms of priorities, managing the pandemic was the priority in so many ways. But at that same time, what was unique to IUP is we were also going through a major reorganization. We were trying to wrap our heads around our new size and the changes in enrollments that we were experiencing. And we were trying to ensure that we had staffing in all of the right places. And all of those were very, very difficult and happening during that critical time. The pandemic didn't cause those other pieces. They were happening anyway, but they were happening in parallel. And I think both of those, the reorganization and the retrenchment, faculty and the pandemic, were just so many, many heavy things to carry through that time that it set the priorities for us in terms of what we needed to do as an institution, and the decision making that had to be done and the work that had to be done to support those decisions. So the priorities, I think, were clear, but they were not easy. It was a very, very challenging time.
I know you said how like you were working from home for around 18 months, like you weren't like in the university setting, you were working from home. Working from home for 18 months, did that make it hard when you made the shift to coming back to IUP, to working more in contact with more people and not just your family and like seeing people via like Zoom and stuff like that?
Yeah, certainly it did. And it kind of happened over time because staff came back first, and 18 months might be a little bit long, but you know, we started to slowly come back. More and more staff came back. During that time, we also did learn how to work remotely, and so we've also thought very carefully now going forward about, do all positions need to be face-to-face and on campus? Which ones do? Which are the most critical? Which can work remotely? Which can have some sort of hybrid element? And those are things I think we're still learning and trying to figure out going forward. So the transition back, I would say, happened slowly. It didn't feel abrupt, but sure, it was really different. And I would say, especially in the beginning, when we were trying to manage safety and we really didn't understand the implications and the proximity and how to maneuver in a physical environment, everybody would come and sit in their offices and then be on Zoom. So, it took us a little while to sort of break out and trust that we could have face-to-face meetings again, and then also how to use them appropriately, when to use them. And again, I think that's something we're still working on.
So, like, as I know you touched upon, like, how, like, you guys, like, use Zoom more often now. As things kind of return more to normal, do you think that they have kind of completely changed, like, how you do work and life? Or do you think that some things have also just reverted back to how they were pre-pandemic?
I think a few things have reverted back, but I mean, everything has changed. And so I think, again, how we use the tools, how we interact with each other, I think how we engage with our colleagues and our students, just looking around campus and students who are here full-time. We have growing numbers in the residence halls, for example, but I still look outside and I feel like we don't have the same number of bodies crossing campus that we used to have pre-pandemic, and trying to understand what that is. I was just, I know our numbers, and this semester, as an example, about 20% of our classes are fully online. That's about twice what it was pre-pandemic. And so that has implications, and that's just fully online. Those that might have a hybrid or some element to them that are online is different. So it's changing the way that I think we build community, that way we experience community. I think a lot of what we talk about in IUP leadership and among some of the faculty circles is, how do we re-engage folks? How do we get folks back to campus? We miss the times to, bring colloquia series or speakers on campus and all, be able to sit around and engage in some of that intellectually stimulating experiences. And more of it's coming back, and more folks are showing up to that. But, even as recent as last fall, but last year in particular, we would host events like that, and more people would be online than would be in the room. Now it's maybe split, but there's still a good number of folks that are Zooming in online for other reasons, not maybe for safety, but also for accessibility, and they wouldn't be able to be there otherwise. So again, trying to figure out how to engage with each other and be a part of a community like a university, given the new tools and ways that we interact.
So with changes that came with, like, your work and, like, also home life from the pandemic, was there anything that you specifically, any changes you specifically enjoyed or specifically disliked?
Okay, let's see. Like I said, I think the best outcome was the closeness of family. That's what really stands out to me, and being able to spend time that I wouldn't have otherwise had. Things that I worry about are the disruption and the social isolation during that time. And so it was really difficult to sustain relationships, not just for me, but for all of us as a society. And so that connectivity, I wonder how much we've lost in that, and what it's going to take to rebuild that. I think, things that I disliked were, obviously being bored at home, being nervous about doing simple tasks in daily life. But I think it was, for me, easy to embrace keeping myself and others safe, and so it wasn't hard to be compliant. But I didn't love it. I'm glad to be back where, you know, we can go to a movie theater and sit next to other people, or go to a restaurant and have other folks there. You know, I'm enjoying all of those social opportunities again, for sure.
You did touch on this beforehand, but how do you think that the pandemic has affected like life at not only at IUP but like IUP's relationship with the community?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think it was significant because our community, especially the immediate surrounding community, depends on the life and the vibrancy of IUP for, you know, inputs into the community, economic development, you know, workforce, you know, all kinds of ways that there's sort of a symbiosis between the university and the community. And that was disrupted, you know, majorly. And so, you know, having it come back, I think, is a very good thing for the community. I think IUP is an important part of this community, and so when we're affected and our community is affected, the larger community is affected. Yeah, I think, you know, we missed our students for sure, and we're glad our students are back.
So now that like things have started returning to like what we can now call like, I guess, the new normal, how have like your priorities, like the projects you're working on, and like job responsibilities evolved since the pandemic?
Yeah, so now I think we can really get down to thinking back to future of IUP. What do we want to be? Where are we going? Thinking of big ideas, maintaining our academic excellence. You know, the business, the core business of what we do as an institution, and there isn't this cloud of the pandemic and managing the pandemic laying over us. We learned a lot. We've documented a lot. If we have another crisis like that, I think we're much better prepared, but it's not a pervasive part of what we do every day. At the beginning of this year, we had a COVID planning team. They submitted a final report with what they learned, what the recommendations would be going forward. And so it feels a little bit like the pandemic has been put to rest. But as I said, there's still a lot of reflecting that's happening. But in terms of day-to-day work, it's pretty much it feels like it's in the rearview mirror.
So kind of turning back to like, you know, like the beginning of the pandemic, was there ever like a specific moment that you remember that like the pandemic first started feeling like actually real to you? Like, oh my gosh, this is actually a thing.
I think it was, well, that first experience I described, sitting in that boardroom and realizing that we were gonna have to make decisions that were more disruptive than, you know, calling a snow day or something, which already feels disruptive, but what are we going to do? And then I would say the next piece was over that semester and realizing that we weren't going to be able to allow people to come back, and then trying to make a decision about the next year and whether we were going to be in person or not. I mean, those were such big disruptive decisions for an in-person, high-touch institution like IUP, where you know, face-to-face is how we work. So to me, those were sort of the big decision points, the big instances that really made this feel significant. And then, of course, in addition to the university business, you know, just being aware that people were really sick, people were dying from this, and safety, not just as a protocol, but safety of keeping people well and understanding that we were losing people in our community. All of that was, yeah, you know, pretty, I think, stark reality that, you know, this isn't something to play with. And that's what led to those big decisions.
Kind of branching off from that, the pandemic was a very big time, especially during lockdown, was a very big time of change, not only like worldwide and like in the community, but how did the pandemic affect your perspective? Because it affected perspectives on like attitudes about the community, employment, economic, society, politics, and even just like your own personal life. Like, how did it affect your attitude?
Yeah. I think to me it sort of brought a sense of vulnerability, or you know, just understanding how I guess vulnerable we are, and things that we take for granted can be called into question, you know, very quickly. And so, but also with that vulnerability is resiliency. I mean, people responded, and of course we got through it, but people cared about each other. People thought about the safety of others, and people found ways to work around it. Like I said, that resiliency showed up in so many ways. Whether it was our faculty responding to how to teach and deliver courses online, our students how to try to figure out how to learn online, resiliency in our community about protecting each other and going out and managing that and making masks available and I think all of those ways that our lives changed and we were able to respond to it. And then the resiliency that came with, as it started to come to a close, or at least started to be managed, how we re-entered back into life. And I think in not only in a resilient manner, but with some reflection about what did we learn from it and what can we learn from it going forward, and reflecting on how it's changing us as a society, as individuals going forward.
You touched a lot on your answers in resiliency. Is there any specific, in a broad way, many different ways? Is there any specific instance or moment during the pandemic, with resiliency that kind of stuck with you?
I think it was the pivot of moving the hundreds and hundreds of sections online. I mean, I just, when we think about the pace at which we were moving to support faculty to bring more innovation and technology into their teaching and learning, I mean, that's sort of was a decade-long initiative. And then to say that we did that within the first time, and I wouldn't say it was maybe the highest quality that first semester, but was, just so quick. And then over the summer, gearing up so that the next fall we had online. So I would say that pivot stands out to me as one of great resiliency. And then I would say in terms of personal life, I guess I just think about again folks just sort of embracing the circumstances and continuing to move through that. So it's certainly slowed some things down and disrupted things, but people continued toward their goals. I mean, they didn't just sort of throw up their hands, and watching people do that in many ways, I guess, is why I use that word. But trying to think of specific examples. So the one that stands out to me is my daughter, who is on the autism spectrum, and people with autism do not typically have a lot of resiliency or ability to pivot or be flexible. And so watching her navigate these significant changes in her life even showed me promise of how we can all sort of rise to it.
So during the pandemic, okay. So in your opinion, how has IUP or the Indiana community in general changed because of the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I think I talked a little bit about this, and I think we are forever changed. I think our students have different expectations, our faculty have different expectations, our staff work with different expectations. There's different modes of interacting. There's different ways of using space. I mean, there's just been, it's really been pervasive in all the ways. The ways that we provide access, not just to courses, but materials, the way the library works. I mean, I think probably every aspect of what we do has had some impact from the pandemic.
So during lockdown itself, lots of people had certain activities and hobbies that they picked up or enjoyed. How did the pandemic affect the activities you did and enjoyed during lockdown?
And so I would talk more about this, I guess, for my personal life, but Obviously there was a lot more engagement with family. My son really got interested in cooking, so we did a lot of cooking. And again, that was, just sort of by necessity as well as by interest. We did jump on the bread baking bandwagon. We bought a pizza oven and started really experimenting with pizzas. What else? Yeah, I think, the activities, yeah, of course, we really got into movies and especially, live television, watching people broadcast from their homes and sort of getting insights into what people's lives look like that we might not have seen otherwise. So I think, yeah, probably pretty typical. I can't think of anything that was really outstanding that surfaced in my family, but yeah.
So, as you said, that you're very involved with your family and doing different activities during the pandemic, but was there anything that you felt like you missed out on because of the pandemic?
Yes, so traveling and seeing extended family. So we didn't get much of a chance to do that. So we have a lot of relatives in the Chicagoland area and didn't get there at the height of the pandemic. My mother-in-law is elderly and she was really nervous about visitors, so we didn't see her for a long time. And of course, that we were really concerned about social isolation for her. So yeah, those were definitely the downsides of that is being place bound.
Is there any specific memory that about like relating to the pandemic that you'd like to share that was significant to you?
About the pandemic. No, I feel very fortunate as a family. We weren't affected directly by the pandemic. Eventually, the COVID made its way into our family, but with much less harmful strains. So we did not experience any of the critical pieces, even with an extended family. So I think there were no negative memories. And then again, I would just say the positive memory was really the being locked down with my family and with an opportunity that was unanticipated.
So circling back a little bit, you talked about how you and your family got into activities like bread baking and pizza making and all of that. Have any of those activities carried into post-pandemic life? Have you guys continued to cook as a family, or even personally use those new hobbies and baking? Did they continue into post-pandemic life?
Yeah, so it has actually. So the cooking has, and so it's something we enjoy. Now my sons are gone again, so they're not there to enjoy it with us. But and I've always enjoyed cooking, but when they do come home, that is certainly something that we sort of gather around now. And we've also been a big game family, so we still play games too. But that would have been pre-pandemic as well. Trying to think of other activities. What I would say is something we didn't experience during pre-pandemic, but is related, is my extended family now makes it a point. So every year we have all of my siblings come together and we do a big vacation together to make sure that at least once a year all of the siblings and cousins are together on a vacation. And so that's been a really nice new personal outcome of the pandemic is that intentional time together.
So during the pandemic itself, especially at the peak of the pandemic, how did you connect with others at the peak of the pandemic? Because I know it was made hard, because you couldn't see people face to face. So how did you continue connection with others during the pandemic when you couldn't see each other?
Yeah, and so that I wish it would have persisted, but it didn't. So during the peak, we would have scheduled Zoom calls with our families, and so on Sundays we would kind of go through several different families and all come together. So we would do my husband's side and then my side to make sure that we were connecting with folks. I do think we were probably checking in with people a little bit more during the peak, but the one key strategy we used were the Sunday evening calls, Zoom calls.
So now that we're no longer in lockdown, I know you said that you wish it would have carried into post-lockdown life, the family Zoom calls and checking in on people more, but has there been like any like little snippet of that that has carried on into post-pandemic life?
Like I said, the big thing was probably with my siblings, where we have these organized vacations now. Um, you know what still exists that I think that's kind of fun are, and again, this isn't something that I think young people would find surprising, but older folks don't have chat groups the same way, but we do now. And so we have various chat groups that have subsets of our family or friend groups that are much more active now, I think, than they maybe would have been. And we set them up during the pandemic, so that's something that does persist, are those chat groups. And every once in a while, they're not as active, of course, but something will pop up in one of those chat groups, and you're like, oh, how nice.
Because of the pandemic, do you feel like your relationships, whether it be with like your friends, family, neighbors, colleagues, or other people, do you feel like that they have weakened, stayed the same, or have become stronger than before the pandemic started?
I can't say any across all those groups you just itemized have weakened. And I would say for some, they've been strengthened for sure. Yeah.
What specific, like if you would feel comfortable going into it, what specific relationships do you feel were stronger because of the pandemic?
Yeah, well, family for sure, like I mentioned, both that immediate family and that really special time of months that we had together, and then the extended family commitments that we've made since then.
Now during the pandemic, there was a lot of like like online like lectures or like how-to videos or even like different things that were available that you could learn new skills or even deepen your learning of something that you're already interested in. Was there anything that you had the time to learn or grow because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, really as needed, but of course we were following a lot of what was really pervasive at the time. So, some of the bread baking stuff we picked up on, but there wasn't anything intentional. I don't know that I felt like I had extra time during the pandemic. So, even though we weren't maybe moving about or, getting together with people on weekends or that kind of socializing, I still felt like it was a very busy time. It was just busy in a different kind of way. But no, I didn't end up picking up any special skills or something I had always wanted to do, and was able to make the time then.
So during the pandemic, there was lots of like new ways, shared experiences that people went through together, and also just like a deeper understanding of people or like a new understanding of people. So during the pandemic, because of the pandemic, excuse me, has this changed how you interacted with people at IUP, people you've interacted with your job, and like people in the community itself?
I don't know if I can say that it has. I think, especially at IUP, a lot of my interactions and relationships are based on mission or project driven, and I don't know that those were affected because those relationships sort of ebb and flow around those projects or initiatives and are sustained by necessity. I mean, of course, I enjoy these people too, but but I can't say that I can really connect that to something that changed or was affected by the pandemic.
Okay. So obviously we're doing this as an oral history project. How would you relate the experience of the pandemic to future generations that did not have to go through this exact same experience as you have?
I think one would be learning from history, and I think, one of the really interesting things about our own experience through this pandemic were the references back to previous pandemics and how similar those experiences were. And so I think it's really important that we're documenting this so that we can make sure that the future knows. I think there might, because we're just so much more of a global society. I think there's the potential for more of these kinds of things into the future. And so I think that preparedness needs to be there. I think what's fresh and what we think about when we think about preparedness is we don't always include the emotional toll, the way that it changes social relationships, those kinds of things. And so I would hope that we would leave some insights for the future about being prepared for those elements as well. But I guess I would also want to make sure that not only is it reacting to and responding to, but that resiliency piece that we sort of can rise to it and move on from.
So connected with like relating to future generations, are there any experiences or specific mindsets that you think would help us navigate a future crisis, whether it be like the pandemic or like a different type of crisis?
Mindset. I mean, I don't think I ever thought during the pandemic that we wouldn't get through it. So I think that was always in my mind, is that this is something we had to work through. I felt like the response from our government, while individual actions might have been questionable at times, we know that there were very smart people working toward trying to find ways to cope with it, whether it was inoculation or other kinds of things. And so I feel like I really felt hopeful all the way through. And so to me, that would maybe be the most important mindset going forward. Is I think it was devastating to a lot of people, and there was a lot of loss. But we, as a society, were able to pull together and move forward. And so I guess that mindset of hope and resiliency is one that I'd like to make sure that move forward.
Is there any specific memory from the pandemic that we weren't able to touch upon that you would like to just share for the purpose of sharing it?
I don't think so. I feel like we've covered everything.
Are there any questions you wish that we would have asked you regarding your experience at IUP or even just in the Indiana community during the pandemic?
No, I think this is a really great interview. That you did a really good job.
Is there anything else you would like us to know?
No, I think that's it.
Actually, if I may.
Yes.
I had just a couple of questions.
Okay.
It circles back to stuff at the beginning, but you mentioned, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned that your position changed
Yes.
at IUP.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just speak to sort of what you were doing before, when that transition happened, and what it looked like afterwards?
Okay, sure. So at the time, I was serving as the College of Education and Communications Dean, and continued through most of the critical parts of the pandemic. And then the fall of 21, so that transition time, just when we were really coming back face to face, is when I transitioned into the interim provost position. And then this spring, stepped into the position permanently. So that was sort of the transition time. But the bulk of the pandemic I spent as a Dean of Education and Communications. And so obviously as a dean, the level of decision making was much different than a provost. I was focused on the programs and academic units within the College of Education and Communications. But as an educator and as somebody who prepares future educators, my focus was really on how do we continue to prepare teachers, how do we support teachers in this kind of environment. And I would say one of that really had huge implications for how we prepare future educators was trying to give them that experience, that new set of tools. And maybe that's why I have this sort of heightened sensitivity and honor for not only our faculty, but schools across the country and how they managed the pandemic while they were still trying to keep kids safe, fed, and educated.
Okay. And then From a student's perspective, IUP's trajectory with pandemic was, at the beginning, it was like only freshmen were allowed on campus, and then others in certain circumstances, and then there was the mask mandates, and then the decision to end the mask mandate. And I was wondering if you had any insight as to how that trajectory was decided upon, what led the university to settle on the time to when the numbers were released for COVID, and when they decided that as a facility, as a university, the pandemic was moving into the rear view with the end of the mask mandate. I was just wondering if you had any.
Yeah. So as an institution, we set up a COVID task force. And so it was a cross-section of representatives from the university who could think about all of the facets of the institution. And they really grappled with a lot of the details, and then would make recommendations to cabinet and the president. They would be discussed there, and then a decision would be made. So that was typically the flow. And as a dean, I wasn't always privy to those, and moved more into those as I became the intern provost. The guidance that the COVID task force took, and I'm sure you're interviewing those folks and they've collected all of these data, but we're really guided by the CDC. So it was looking at CDC policy, and then how does that apply to what's happening here locally, and then trying to make the best decision going forward. But particularly as it relates to the mask mandates and when to make them mandatory or make them optional, that was really, a lot of that was based on CDC guidance.
Okay. And then, did you ever have any sort of direct relations with President Driscoll with decisions that were made? Were you ever called in to ask a dean's perspective on the educational side of things, or how to best help students or staff? Were you ever sort of asked, or were included on discussions that were?
Absolutely, yeah. With a regularity, especially as it related to specific discipline needs. So as I was describing, training future educators, but not just educators, all of those who work in the educational sector, and then of course communications and other areas. So I was brought in to bring in that perspective, what's happening with policy, what's happening with the Department of Education, what's happening federally, to make sure that again IUP was in alignment with that. And that was similar across the other colleges. So what was happening in Health and Human Services or some of the other areas. So Dean's perspective was absolutely brought in, particularly for that discipline-specific recognition and or understanding. And then, but typically the reporting lines were followed. So the president has his cabinet. There was this university-wide COVID planning group and a response team, and then the provost at the time, Timothy Moreland, oversees all of academic affairs, and the deans report through him. So he would have his council of deans and have regular communications there too. So sometimes they were directly with President Driscoll, and sometimes they were through the provost.
If, just hypothetically, if COVID or another COVID-adjacent pandemic were to fully hit just as hard and shut everything down, how do you think having this experience from 2020, how do you think IUP as a community, as an institution would handle it? Would it be leaps and bounds better than what it was then? Or would there still be some struggles that you just can't predict?
I'm sure there'll be elements that we wouldn't be able to predict. I think using the planning group was an important strategy that we would probably use again. I think following the best science that we have available and the best evidence that we have available through entities like the CDC would probably continue to be a guiding factor. And but I also think that we learned a lot in terms of how do we think about our facilities, about how we deliver education, what do faculty need, what kind of support do they need, what do students need. How do we think about different kinds of learning that happens? And how do we manage that? So again, I think there's learning from that we could probably do better, faster. But I think we also did a lot right.
Yeah. And then I think just a final question that I have. As a result of the pandemic, a lot of other, and maybe not directly a result of the pandemic, but it certainly didn't help things. A lot of other universities in the PASHE system, like say Edinburgh or other universities, have ended up merging. Obviously that is not the case with IUP. So I was just wondering, why do you think that is? What maybe sets IUP apart from, say, Edinburgh or Cal U that
Yeah.
caused
I
that?
think it was tough. I think the demographics are not in our favor in Pennsylvania. We have an aging population. We have a much smaller number of students that are the typical base for the state system schools. And so the enrollment challenges are well understood, are forecasted, and we're doing our best to work through them going forward. So I think the merging of those schools wasn't just the result of the pandemic. We all already had to be thinking about what was the future of the state system, and did we need 14 schools, and how could we leverage the strengths of all the schools. And so the two sets of merged institutions have evolved and are continuing to evolve through Penn West and Commonwealth universities. IUP, I think, is unique in the system. We have a different legislated mission than the rest of the state system. We're the doctoral research institution within the system. And because of that, I think that sets us apart. I think it helps us maintain a base of students that the other schools don't get. And then there was also a very specific legislated act, and I won't be able to remember the act number, but where schools less than 10,000 were those that were considered to be merged, and IUP at the time did not meet those criteria. And the act was a very short-term act, so it was looking at one very specific snapshot in time. So we weren't just because we didn't meet that profile. But I think there were more reasons than that in terms of just who we are as an institution. And so with our graduate mission, our doctoral research mission, and that uniqueness and how it sets us apart, I think merging us just wouldn't make sense for the system. Instead, I would like to see, and we've seen some of, and that is reinvestment in the state system and helping all of us be successful going forward. So I'm not concerned about that in our future.
All right. And then the actual final question.
Okay.
Just thought of them. With how everything's gone, obviously this has been a very tumultuous past 2+ years. For just the future of IUP as a whole, what are you hopeful for? What is, if there's anything in particular you'd like that is being planned, that is being rolled out, what are you hopeful for the future of IUP?
Yeah, well, I think that IUP is poised for, I think, some significant opportunities. And I think some of the things that we are talking about for our future are very exciting. There's an exploration right now looking at the possibility of a School of Osteopathic Medicine to leverage our strengths in health sciences and to think about ways that we can help address the rural health needs of the Commonwealth. I think, to me, that's not only exciting for IUP, but it's the right thing to do. But I think that could have a transformational effect on IUP, our community, our state system, our Commonwealth. And so to me, that's probably the most significant thing that we have in front of us. The other piece that I am, and what made me want to continue my career with IUP and really sort of double down in my efforts to IUP is our commitment to student success. So we have a strategic plan right now that focuses on how are we improving every way that we interact with students from the minute they say they might be interested in IUP all the way through post-graduation. And so we're looking at every process, every tool, how we support our faculty, how do we support our students through all of that trajectory. IUP just has a lot of strengths that I think position it for differences that the other state system schools don't have. And I don't, this isn't a comparison with the other state system schools necessarily, but it's what makes, I think, IUP unique. And having the opportunities that we have for students related to our doctoral research mission, I think, are really important. And so that's another piece that's very exciting to me, are trying to give students those research and inquiry-based experiences so that they are developing as critical thinkers, communicators, whatever direction they're heading. And so even engaged opportunities like this in your classroom, where you're having an opportunity to talk with the provost, and you're having an opportunity to guide the reflection that's happening at IUP in the community about the pandemic, those are powerful learning experiences. And that, I would imagine you're learning a lot of skill sets, from setting up a camera to taking notes to transcribing and then being able to synthesize and make sense of those. Those are the powerful experiences that well into your future, when you're set in your career and you look back, you might not remember every lecture, but you're likely to remember these kinds of experiences. And that's where our head is trying to figure out, how do we give those immersive, transformational experiences to our students. So to me, that's a very broad answer to your question. There's something really tangible and exciting about the School of Medicine possibility, but I think what's even more powerful is this reimagined commitment to student success. I think we've always been about students. We've always described ourselves as a high-touch institution, but the way that we're talking about it and the way that we're planning and executing it is different. And I hope you feel it. I don't know.
All right, well, I think that's all we have.
Okay.
But thank you so much.
Yeah,
for your
thank
time.
you. This was fun. Yes, I appreciate it.
All right. Perfect. Cool. Okay.
And hopefully you're doing okay.
Yeah, I was so sorry.
Oh, don't worry about it. I was,
I just
yeah.
I thought it was gonna be like 2 seconds, and I just kept coughing.
Coughing,
and I
yeah,
was
that
like,
happens
you know what,
to
I'm
me.
just going to just
It's
walk
dry
as
in
far
here,
away
too.
as possible, so I
Yeah.
don't get
Do you need a
coughing.
glass of water now? I can get you a bottle of water. You want me to get you water?